Well, hello and welcome everyone to our Texas event. It's going to be a good one. If you would please all let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Just go to the chat and type yes. Okay, I'm getting some good reactions. Perfect. All right, before I let Dr. Dickerson introduce the event, I will just go over a few logistics. So as you have already discovered the chat, that's great. That's where you can communicate throughout the event. There is also a Q&A feature that I highly recommend you use because there's actually a nice feature there where you can upvote the questions that interest you most, so that when our feature speaker takes your questions, we can look at what is most interesting to you all. Just so you know, this event is also currently being live streamed on the, I was only able to connect it to the San Antonio Free Market Medical Association Facebook page. So if you want to share that on your profiles to maximize reach, that would be great. There is also, once this main session ends, there is the ability to go back to the networking room where you were earlier, and you can continue the conversation that you might have started or go deeper into a topic. As for now, oh yeah, so there is a raise your hand feature. So when Dr. Dickerson calls on you to come on stage, it would help me a lot if you raised your hand, because then I can easily bring you on stage. Dr. Dickerson, you can also point out the names, because I might not always know who is responsible for a chapter, and then I can find them in the list. But that's all for logistics from my end. I will leave the virtual floor to Dr. Dickerson.
Thanks so much. And I want to say a very huge shout out to Shankar and to Andrea for hosting this on this platform. It's super interesting, and we're all kind of learning as we go. But I think it really gives us an interesting way to interact in this virtual world. So I'm very excited to be here today and excited to have Dave Chase. I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir. I think most of you know Dave, but he was really kind of a life changer for me when we sponsored our first Houston chapter event. Dave spoke and kind of crystallized. I knew so many things in medicine were broken, but he showed me graphs and charts and statistics that really helped me hone in on what I already knew intuitively in real numbers. And I just want to give him thanks for that, and thanks for being here today. And let's hear about what Health Rosetta's conference next week. The Green Imaging team, Leanne and Catherine and I will be there participating in karaoke. Leanne thinks we're singing Country Roads, and I'm convincing her no, but we're working that direction, and we're excited to be there next week. So Dave, I'll let you take it.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to try to share my screen here, and hopefully it will all work as advertised, because this is a new platform for me. So is everybody able to see? All right. How is that?
Good.
All good? Okay, great. Well, I will go ahead and jump right into it. And basically, probably go back one slide. So, what we're all about is empowering community-owned health plans. I'm going to speak a little bit more about that. That will be one of our updates, because since I presented last time, I kind of went through our change process. And one way I describe what we're doing is kind of by the opposite of what's happening, because you flip those words on their head, that pretty much describes the status quo: disempowering Wall Street rented sick care plans. And what we have found is when people adopt this blueprint, that if every employer did, it would be like a recurring $500 billion stimulus every year. So it's quite dramatic. And so we have this summit coming up. Some of you have read my first book, which was the CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream. We're now at the 5-year anniversary, and we had this idea that if we shared and open sourced what some of these brave pioneers were doing, others would join. And that's happening. Now we are publishing this special edition book for the summit next week called The CEOs Who Restored the American Dream. We're doing it in conjunction with Patients Rising and their Healthcare Heroes Awards. And we have the high class problem now of we had to stop new case studies at 100 pages. So lots of good stuff going on. It was really just a hypothesis that this would happen. Now it's happening in every corner of the country, rural, urban, small and large employers in the private and public sector. And we're gathering in person in Denver, but we're also, for the first time, live casting on LinkedIn. And so you can go to this URL, just healthrosetta.org/Denver, and you can register for the that live feed. And there's a schedule there, so you can figure out when you want to jump in or not. So that's one kind of housekeeping thing, but really just giving a sample of what's been happening. The community owned health plans, which I'll define a little bit more in a minute, they're really taking employee health plans from the number one driver of inflation, debt, poverty, and bankruptcy, which is a sad statement, but a true statement, to a top driver of well-being and wealth. And a few examples that have happened. A school district we're going to talk quite a bit more about. It's a case study in the new book as well. In some ways saved this school district. When their school levy failed last year, and it's the 8th poorest school district in the state of Ohio, that would have been devastating. However, they had put in a plan 12 to 18 months before, and they had saved more than the entire school levy. And so they didn't have to cut teachers, programs, schools, any of that. And there's a number of other case studies, Rosen Hotels being the longest standing one. And then more and more, we're having these community health plans. So Ashtabula is part of that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Another example we were just presenting on at a webinar we had was the Central Pennsylvania Community Owned Health Plan. And really the last thing I would say on this is the folks that we really care about are who I call Forgotten Fran or Forgotten Frank. These are the working and middle class individuals who've had 30 years of wage gains stolen by the status quo health plans. And it's sad, but avoidable situation. And when it's turned around, the results are quite remarkable. And just to define what we see in successful community-owned health plans, if you kind of work from kind of the bottom left, they're purpose-built for this era. Status quo plans were built in an era where, acute hospitalizations were the primary issue. And they were really designed when the greatest generation, the boomers, were the predominant chunk of the workforce. Today, it's Xers and millennials and post-millennials, Gen Z, I guess they're calling them now. And does anybody think that plans that were really fundamentally designed 50 years ago are going to be a fit for this era? It's clear that's not the case. And so that's one of the key things here. And it's chronic disease and mental health that are predominant issues today. Number two, and this has been probably the biggest change in the last 5 years, there had been pioneers doing great work. It was just way too much work, worth it, but way too much work to do these high performance health plans. And these community-owned health plans are about making it dramatically easier to implement. And again, I'll give you a couple examples in a minute. But we see where there's at least 1,000 people from many different organizations as kind of a good litmus test. As I alluded to at the outset, there's really this ownership mindset versus, renter mindset. And long-term ownership and governance is controlled by those who receive the care and locally rooted healthcare providers, service providers, citizens, and all of that. So that's really very different. What we have today makes perfect sense if your goal is to optimize Wall Street returns. All these things that are going on make perfect sense in that context. That's just not the context that we want. The next piece is, since we sort of put out there these Health Rosetta Principles. There's the Plan Sponsor Bill of Rights, Advisor Code of Conduct, Compensation Disclosure, which is now the law of the land, which we pioneered. Those are key elements. And then finally, this is really important and quite different than some solid efforts that have happened before, is our purpose. We call it the Health Rosetta dividend. We know we are wasting $1.5 trillion with a T in the US healthcare system. I often say healthcare isn't expensive, right? Clinicians are only getting 27 cents of every dollar. What's expensive is profiteering, price gouging, administrative bloat, fraud, and some inappropriate care. And if you choose to not pay for those things or minimize them, there's massive dollars freed up, and it allows to break this artificial economic wall between the sick care system and what drives 80% of health outcomes. And so we see remarkable things happening, whether it's paying for college education or better food, all kinds of better just pay and whatnot. I mean, the number one social determinant of health is income. And when you have 30 years of wage gain stolen for more than half the workforce, you've got a big problem on your hands. And you might ask, why now? What's happened? One is we had a webinar on this. We could send you links if you want. There were two separate things that happened. An executive order and the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. If you take those as one, which were implemented in the same time frame, and we played a pretty important role in those. It represents the largest change in employee health benefits since 1943 and the largest change in corporate governance since Sarbanes-Oxley in 2002. So that's a big factor. I mentioned the generational shift already. And then finally, we now have advisors that we've accredited that collectively are stewarding 5 million lives. And when you see these community-owned health plans, word of mouth is how they spread. We don't need to sponsor, stadiums or buy TV ads. It just spreads because the results are so dramatically better. And a good example of this is Ashtabula in Northeast Ohio. If you look at kind of what happened, 4 years ago, Bryce Heimbaugh joined our program, previously didn't know anything about this world, but smart, passionate guy, I think many of you know. And he jumped in, but, pretty modest, right? One employer cut his teeth, 38 lives. Next year, several employers, 535 lives. And he actually kind of sort of hit a pause at that point to build that infrastructure because he saw, wow, this thing is going to take off. And despite that, still grew, more than 2.5 times, and now is really off to the races. He's got a line of sight to another 4,000 lives, and before long, you have 10,000 lives there. And that becomes a very meaningful figure from a number of different perspectives, including actuarial risk. So it's all these independent employers on the same chassis, but benefiting from the efficiencies there. And as you see in the quote, Bryce has gone from pushing this boulder up a hill of trying to convince people that this is real, because it kind of sounds, too good to be true. The subtitle of my first book was How to Deliver World-Class Healthcare to Your Employees at Half the Cost. That's actually a real thing, but it sounds like, some crazy infomercial. But once it, pervades a community, then it goes from, this seems risky and all that, to I just want what Bob and Sally have down the street. And what we've seen, and I really encourage you to think about geographic concentration, because healthcare is local. As we see this kind of rule of threes, where, you get started, you get 3 employers, that's enough to kind of give you some sense of the capacity you need to build internally to support them. You're figuring out the local landscape as far as the healthcare delivery organization. Maybe you're starting to have some direct contracting conversations. And then the next milestone is 9, 3 times 3, where at that point, the delivery organizations actually not only recognize this previously unfamiliar card that doesn't have a national logo of some giant carrier, but they love it. They love it because they pay promptly. They cut out the middleman. They waive cost sharing. These are the types of things that can solve problems that the healthcare delivery organizations have. And, again, word of mouth starting to spread a little bit. Where we see a real tipping point, although I'd say we've actually seen a little earlier than this, is 27, 3 times 3 times 3, where at that point you have 5% of the local market landscape. And there's actually a TED talk by Erica Chenoweth, talks about revolutions and social movements, and you only need 3.5% of a population to tip the market, because that number of people know everybody. And that's what we're seeing. And you've seen their private sector employers like auto dealers and manufacturers, chemical companies, the county, the school district, the city now. And, in some ways, it's almost shaming some of the private sector companies because they tend to think that they're more innovative and faster moving than the public sector. And now you've got all the major public sector entities on board with this and having a huge impact in the community. The other thing that we're going to roll out at the summit has been something that we've been marinating on really since day one of Health Rosetta. And we kind of had this big, gnarly spreadsheet for 3 or 4 years. But we're rolling out this, what we call Plan Grader, because we now have confidence that we know the 40 most important attributes of a vibrant, high-performance health plan. And, that's almost like a diagnostic score that you get in the 8 areas of the Health Rosetta Blueprint. And other than Medicare star ratings, it's kind of weird. There's not been an objective mark of value of health plans. And that's part of how you have effective social movements, is you reset expectations higher. And so as you score some of these plans really get low scores, as they should. Now, we're pretty tough graders, but if you're spending, 2 times what the rest of the world is spending, you should have high expectations. And so we give this kind of score, and then, if you will, there's a prescription. How do you address that? We break, this is one area, transparent advisor relationships, where we break down, what are the key issues? How did they answer these, and how do they fix these issues where there's deficits? So you're removing any question as to what's the right action. You may not take all those actions right away, but that's one of the things that we're rolling out at the summit to kind of give people that 3-year roadmap on how to do it. And so at this point, it's only available through Health Rosetta accredited advisors, and we have a employer program that's been in beta that they get access to it as well. But you can find a Health Rosetta advisor. So I know some are on this call, but you can go to healthrosetta.org/map, find somebody near you, and they have access to it. And it's also going to be useful in some things we're going to talk about in a moment. So going back, I think I took you through this 5-step transformation process that spells out this acrostic. And you may remember that 4 of the 5 steps are invisible to the member, or only a clear positive. And so this is all about making these plans, rather than Wall Street, they're local, rather than toxic. There's this concept of financial toxicity creates clinical toxicity. They're sort of organic by comparison, and sustainable. We've said the system is not sustainable for decades. We now have something that is sustainable. You can predictably budget for this if you're a company. And I won't go through all these steps because hopefully you're familiar with them, and they're also available in my book. But this is one of the things I'm going to drill down a little bit on. 5 years ago, I wrote a chapter in the book quoting a risk management practice leader from one of the big 4 firms, that the ERISA fiduciary risk was the largest undisclosed risk they'd seen in their career. And 5 years ago, I had a dream that what is now taking place would happen. And just expand on that a little bit. If you look at the other side of ERISA, which is retirement benefits, and these 2 are carbon copies of each other. When there was guidance around the broker fee disclosure, which was the core issue that went to the Supreme Court the class action firm that took these cases, 401k, 403b, unanimous verdicts in both cases. It did revolve around this broker fee. Now this is the law of the land as of January 1. And it's interesting. There are certainly status quo brokers who are trying to put their head in the sand, and it's really on the employer to get this information from their broker. And if they don't, they're at risk. And if you talk to ERISA attorneys, there's been more enforcement action and audits in the last 6 to 9 months than the prior 20 years combined. So it is game on. Schlichter, Bogard, and Denton, which has taken these cases, is one of the class action firms now focused on healthcare. So this is not a drill. This is not a possible future. It is now clicking in. And you can see it didn't take that long for it to actually get, certified as a class action and then make its way to the Supreme Court and a decision. And if you look at what happened in retirement benefits, for example, Morgan Stanley went from 12,000 retirement brokers to 200 fiduciaries. It is bringing big change. And so I want to talk specifically and kind of drill down on what we're going to really highlight, another thing we're announcing. But first of all, where we're particularly focused is the mid-market, this 50 to 5,000 employer size organization. That is really the sweet spot of where the action is. And there's a ton of lives. So you're talking 90 million lives. This is not small. They have, in many cases, they have more local influence than even multinationals that are headquartered there. A lot of times, and it has spillover both up market to large employers and down market to smaller employers. And it's kind of off the radar. Decision cycles are much quicker. It's easier to experiment. And so that's where we are taking something that I would draw an analogy that is probably the single biggest aha that we've had in Health Rosetta, which is, yes, you think about your daily life, there's federal laws, there's state laws, and there's local laws. In many ways, the local laws are what we're most affected by. And in healthcare, to draw that analogy, yes, there are federal and state laws that are important in healthcare, but really, in effect, the local laws are the legal documents that underpin health plans. And what we found in the mid-market, and frankly, even more so in the small end of the market, and quite a bit the jumbo market, is most employers are taking these legal contracts that underpin health plans, and they're giving them the same scrutiny that I give to a terms of service on some consumer website. I'm not going to read that 30-page thing. Yep. Click accept. But the problem is, those legal documents are what codify the $1.5 trillion in waste. And I'll highlight a few of the sort of issues that you need to tackle. The reason the worst result that we've had when we're directly involved in a health plan is a 20% absolute reduction in spend, not like a 20% less sucky increase, but an absolute reduction, is we really sweat those. Those are the de facto laws of the land of what I call healthcareistan. This, the fourth largest economy in the world is our U.S. healthcare system. And what we waste would be the 11th largest economy in the world. Larger than Russia is what we waste, which is really grotesque when there's all the needs that we have. And so what we found is current norms really prevent the market from, achieving the quadruple aim and, having a great experience for the care team, the patient, having better outcomes, lowering costs, huge opacity, that you can't get in and people claim it's their data and their rights. It's largely BS. It limits the things that prevent a free market from operating when we go through these things. And so we're basically going to go through this. A couple other things that are just high level overview is the blue items are kind of the boring underpinnings, if you will, the plan documents, the plan contracts, right, between different vendors. And then the purple is the provider access contracting. And these things play off of each other. And there's huge waste just in the mid-market. We think there's $32 billion of waste on just the admin side, which is a pretty small slice. And then the provider contracting. A lot of the contracts with health systems are very problematic, and they're very fixable. And what we find is the kind of the blue is kind of the master key that unlocks the purple, because there's a lot of things that are prevented in contracts, even when you have a willing buyer and seller. So we get rid of that. And so what we're doing is, rather than keeping that stuff proprietary, we are open sourcing this, like we have open sourced the blueprint. So we go through, it's not just here's model language, that's useful, but it's almost like me sending you a picture of a beautiful family and saying, here's how you raise a great family. Now you need more than that. So we are doing the grinding work of going through clause by clause. Does this clause matter? How much does it matter? Is variability okay? What are the key issues for the member, the employer? What's model language if you can start with your contract? If you can't, what's a checklist of issues you need to make sure that you address, or you're going to have you're going to basically fail in your fiduciary duty, and then have a self-perpetuating process for updating that. And we think that will attract more and more employers into this, enable more stakeholders, make it easier to have a true free market, and in the process, reduce admin, streamline execution. As I mentioned earlier, it's way too much work to do these things. Worth it, but still way too much work. It won't get mainstreamed if it remains as much work, and in the process, reduce risk. So with that, that's kind of a little flyover preview. Again, we'd love you to join us either in Denver or sign up for our live cast. We're pretty much getting at capacity in person, but we're making this available. So appreciate the opportunity to give you the update. Love the work you're doing. And thanks for the support from Dr. Dickerson, and hope you enjoy the rest of your updates. Thank you so much.
Dave, thanks so much for joining us today, and we're really looking forward to seeing you next week. And those of you who can join, the content is always amazing, and I think you'll really hear some wonderful speakers, and we always walk away energized from Dave's events. So Dave and Lillian do a wonderful job on these. So we're excited about it and looking forward to that. So moving forward, what we'd like to do today is, kind of let each of the chapter leaders talk about what's happening, really, I think, in their community and in their chapter, what they see as trending. We're definitely adding chapters in Texas, which is exciting. I think we're gaining ground. I testified last week before the state legislature, and it was really fun. Rachel Means was there and presenting what she's doing in Tyler. It was really fun to kind of get this groundswell, and they were listening to us. That committee really got it and understood what we were saying. So I think, I think collectively we do need to pull our energies together, take energy from each other, know what's available in each other's communities, because we certainly have patients willing to drive, and my company has patients in all of your communities, has members in all of your communities. And so the more resources I think we can share, the better off we'll be. So I think the idea was to start in alphabetical order and of the cities. And so that would bring Josh Butler of Amarillo on first. Josh, you want to give us an update? I think if you raise your hand, oh, there you go. If you raise your hand, there you go. Great. And
Excellent.
while if anybody has problems with your speaker or your mic, go to the settings. And then what I have to do, my speaker keeps going off. I have to listen to the tone. And once I listen to the tone, it comes back on. So that's just a little trick. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Kristen, how are you today? Good deal. Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Dave, if you're still on, and we really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week in Denver. We're going to be talking about some things that we're doing in East Tennessee, but I'll give an update real quick about the Amarillo chapter and FMA and what we're doing here in the Amarillo community in the greater 26 counties of the Texas Panhandle. Sometimes, Texas is a really big state, and I'm a long ways from Denver. But I'm twice as close to Denver than I am to Dallas, Houston. So it's a big place. But we have also launched a community-owned health plan here in Amarillo, Texas. The name of it is High Plains Health Plan. It is predicated on best practices that you just heard Dave talking about. It's predicated a lot on local direct contracts. We do utilize green imaging very extensively here in the Texas Panhandle as one of the participating vendors. And what we found as a consulting firm is all of these things that we're aggregating, all the solutions in healthcare to drive down unit cost of care. Employers still need a plan at the end of the day to kind of wrap everything up and administer it for their employees. When you have direct contracts with physician groups and hospitals and surgery centers, and you're collaborating with people like FMMA and other physicians and clinical providers, then you need a health plan to be able to displace the big insurance companies, or the BUCAs as we like to call them. And so even though our chapter is very, very young here in Amarillo, we're very excited. I would love feedback from other members about your earliest meetings, the days of inception, because we are probably one of the youngest chapters most recently to start one here in Amarillo. So any advice you guys can help, or any assistance, we'd greatly appreciate it. Great to see everybody.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. And that would take us over to Austin and to Sean Kelly. There we go. I think we're all getting used to this new platform. Seems to take a little time to transfer over. Josh, we had our first three Houston meetings in person. Of course, pre-pandemic. We did breakfast meetings, and we did have big speakers like Dave and Marnie Jameson, but we definitely, got good traction and startup that way. There's Sean.
Hey, Kristen, how are you? So I'll go ahead and give a quick update on the Austin chapter and what's been going on in our community. Our chapter went into a hiatus for a period of time very recently, probably in the last 3 or 4 months, based on some conversations I had with Dr. Tony Dale of Sedera at the FMMA national meeting. We got together, and he generously offered his support of some of his admin team and his facilities. And so about a month ago, we met at the Sedera offices. We had good attendance. We had 3 direct primary care doctors and about a total of 12 people come to the meeting, which surprised me. I thought it would only be about 4 or 5. It was great. What we agreed was this month's meeting is this event right here. So hopefully we've got some people from our chapter in our region attending today. And then we're going to go ahead and have our next meeting in October. But going forward, we're going to try to drive 2 things. We're going to continue to try to bring in more employers, more consultants, but then we're also going to start trying to bring in more of our intermediaries. So TPAs, navigation companies, the like, bring those into our fold. There are several in our community, and we want to engage them and bring them in. And then one thing that came up that I thought was very interesting was everybody wanted to find out how we could drive revenue to one another, which I thought was very in line with what you were talking about a few seconds ago, Chris, when you said, I have lives in all your communities. There is an interconnectedness to all of what we're doing. And I think sometimes we get into this evangelization mode where we talk a lot about let's change the world, and we're so fired up about it, and we've all got our ideas about it, and everybody's voice is very, very helpful. But I think there's some real tactical things we can do, like help one another with a client, bring someone else into a client that I have, and vice versa. And so I think that was a very interesting development. More on that later. And then we'll be in Denver next week as well, going up to get out of the heat. Hopefully this time I come back from Colorado and don't have COVID, but you never know. So, and then the people from Sedera who've been helping us out, I just want to mention their names. It's Jenny Agamalian and Tracy Bigler, and they've been phenomenal as far as helping me, helping the whole chapter get everything set up and the invites sent out and stuff. In our community, I'll tell you, the school districts have been a real big welcome change. Travis County finally put the last nail in the coffin with us recently in a form letter. But so some of our municipalities are not getting on board, but school districts are. And shout out to Mr. Greg Coldaway on that one. He's done a phenomenal job and dragging them. Some of them dragging him, but others come more willing. But and then Kempton's been phenomenal in getting those plans turned on, and everybody utilizing the special services that these health plans have to save the employers a lot of money and the employees. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And then I want to give a shout out to our newest chapter. I'm not sure that they're on, but we have Dr. Peter Lazapina and Cynthia Garcia, who are firing up the Rio Grande Valley chapter. So we hope they'll have updates for us the next time we do this. Moving right along, I guess next in line is the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter, which is in transition. But Brett, can you kind of tell us where they are and where you're moving?
All right, Kristen, you there?
Oh, wrong Brett. We're looking for Brett Brummett. But I'll give a shout out to Brett Shoemaker. He's with First Primary Care in Houston, Direct Primary Care. And his Dr. Goyle, who was the founder of that Direct Primary Care practice, was my co-founder of the Houston chapter. So is Brett Brummett still on? Hey, Brett.
I can no longer.
We having some trouble.
I can no longer see him in the guest list.
Next up, if we don't have Brett Brummett on, I'd love for Juliette Breeze to tell us kind of what she sees going on in Houston. Certainly, we're both the chapter and Juliette's company, Next Level Urgent Care and Green Imaging, are all trying to work together with the Houston Business Coalition on Health. To try to really get some traction going. So Juliette, you want to talk about what you see in our community?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's I feel like things are really heating up in Houston. Lots of energy around solving healthcare pricing woes. We've had a lot of interest in we do an advanced primary care product so when we're kind of talking to employers of all sizes, something new that's maybe it's not new, but smaller employers like the under 100 employers have, I think, really grabbed hold of this idea. And there's quite a bit of interest that way. What Kristen was referring to on the HBCH front is, there's a group of people who have come together as employer organizations and are very unhappy with the direction of healthcare costs. So they are trying to establish their own plan that they, as employers, basically launch together. And that would include advanced primary care, and it would include direct contracting relationships with different facilities and things like green imaging. They're looking at this comprehensive package that they want to put together. I think that is, it's a big project. And one of the things that seems to be happening is everybody has an opinion. And I think it's slowing down the progress. I think they got really excited and they started making a lot of headway. And I think now they may be taking a step back and just saying, holy cow, how do we make everyone happy? Because there's just a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But I think at the end of the day, they all agree on one thing, which is they're not really happy with what their choices are now. So the really big, interesting thing will be, can they come together to help each other to set up something that works for mostly for everyone. So I don't know, Kristen, I mean, if you have any thoughts on that from your perspective. I'm involved, but not deeply involved.
And that, that's always the problem. I remember somebody telling me, and I didn't get it until now. I've been doing this 10 years, almost 11, but that every health plan is different. And that's one of the problems. Every employer has different needs. And I think one of the beautiful things that we're seeing, with these Rosetta advisors and with these innovative advisors is they work on that. They pull together a health plan that fits that employer. And so I'm not sure that a health plan is the answer. I think it's a model maybe. And I love the Rosetta, the auto-embedded solutions idea where they have a menu of options. And, that works really well. It works great for us as providers because we're not having to contract with all these entities. That contract is right there. All they have to do is click a button and it happens along the way. And so what that enables us to do is work with these smaller employers cost effectively, because it costs the same to me to negotiate a contract with 100 life group as it does a 10,000 life group. You and I are both in that arena. We're working with the big boys, but we want to work with those 25 life groups. We were there once. Yeah. And so, I think that's really important for everybody to hear and everybody to understand, because it is truly, a school district that wants, everybody to get care, that is really doing their fiduciary duty, is really different than somebody who's just trying to keep healthcare on the table for their employees, so it is an option. So that's my spiel. Anything else to add about Houston? And
no, I think, like I said, we found ourselves in the middle of a big uprising. It really feels like there's a lot of movement in this space right now. So it's an exciting time.
It does. And I want to shout out to the Higginbotham advisors too, because I think they've really been a big part of that.
Absolutely.
We've been working, more in Florida than in Houston, which just is crazy to me. And now suddenly we've got, big name employers in Houston, and that's really exciting. So that's good. That's it for Houston. So moving right along, I guess that brings us to, does that take us all the way to San Antonio, I think?
How do I get off?
All right. Well, I have Dr. Roger. I have invited you to stage. Let's see. There we go. Dr. Roger, do you want to kick us off?
There we go. Okay. So yeah, first of all, I would just like to say it's great to be here this afternoon on this Texas FMMA meeting and meet and see all of the other Texas chapter leaders. I want to say thanks to Dave Chase for joining us and providing that great info and all the good stuff coming next week. I had the pleasure of testifying as well with Dr. Dickerson last week in Austin, and I think that's part of the momentum that we're building here, that you guys are building there in Houston and elsewhere. You know, that we're being recognized, and that's always been part of our goal in San Antonio, is to get the key players together, being the doctors, clinicians, and then employers and a few benefits advisors that get it together and build that free market in healthcare. That's always been our goal, and I feel like we have been gaining some great traction with that, evidenced by being invited to come testify and present a case study, which I presented last week, which just shows the power of direct contracting and transparency, which that's what we've always been wanting to do, is do the best that we can in my own sphere, my own clinic, to gain exposure that will also help anybody else in this area, in this market, or abroad in other parts of the state. Say, oh, look, they're doing this, they're getting this kind of results. I think I can do that too if I'm a doctor. Or, and we've had a doctor recently do that. She was exposed to us through the FMMA. That's Dr. Claire Zangerly, and she went off and started her own DPC practice, just launched. So that's part of the success from our chapter. And then another success story we had are some mid-sized companies that have attended some of our meetings, and now one of them had us in open enrollment last fall. Now another one is doing a beta test with us. So to me, that is evidence that what we are doing is working. It just takes time. And, you know, a lot of times the way we just want things to be done really quickly and right away. But sometimes to build something of great value, it just takes a little bit of time. And I'd like to give a great big shout out to Shankar and Andrea, my co-founders, because they are so good at just exposing what we do. So I feel like we are getting traction. We've got some good momentum in this market. Turn it over to Shankar and Andrea.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Roger. Yeah, for me as a IT and marketing and PR professional, I really like to focus on how can we spread the message as far as possible. And I would like to thank the FMMA community very much for being recognized in that aspect, as the Be a Beacon award that we received in Dallas. I will say that I get a lot of requests from all over the nation, other chapters, who ask, how can we do this? How can we organize ourselves? And I think that I'm going to make a mini course available to the community. Probably my target goal is to roll that out within 3 or 4 months, so that there are just the running a chapter from the outreach perspective 101, if you will, not too complicated, so that others can replicate it. But yeah, I will also let Andrea speak to her work. She does a lot of outreach work, because our model is always finding an interesting person, giving them a platform, and then marketing to get eyes on the information. But Andrea, you can maybe highlight how you do that, and also who we've had on this year.
Thank you. So just very briefly, it's such a pleasure to be here, and always happy to do this with Dr. Roger Muchigimba and Shankar. And thank you, Dr. Dickerson, for getting all of this together. So our last 3 meetings were on understanding the Consolidated Appropriations Act with Jamie Greenleaf and Jed Cohen. Jamie Greenleaf will also be at the Health Rosetta Summit. So they had really good information, both for employers and advisors. And previously, before that, we had the Texas Legislative Update in Direct Care and Free Market with Dr. Phil Eskew, who is a DO, JD, and MBA. And the one before that was the No Surprise Act with Dr. Eric Bricker. And I mentioned that to let you know because the history speaks for itself. So those were our last 3 meetings and kind of cover what we've done over the last 6 months. And overall, we also highlight our local chapter members who make up the chapter for what it is, because part of the problem in this whole thing is that we're not able to bring everybody together if we don't know who they are, what they do, what their role is in this whole ecosystem. So it's really nice to just have a place where people are able to come together, understand a little bit more about how they should be operating in a free market space. And maybe it's not really that spoken about in their education or in, I guess, basically everywhere outside of this type of space. So give us a like and follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn if you want to know more about what we're doing. And I promise you it'll be well worth it. So thanks again, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you later.
And those are the winners of the Beacon Award at the National FMMA conference. So we're blessed to have them in our state and helping us with this event as well. And so that brings up Kelly Fristow and the Wichita Falls chapter, our second newest chapter. And I'm hearing great things about the Wichita Falls is making one of those, like Dave said, real transitions to the employers demanding different solutions. And while he is bringing up Kelly, let's see, it sounds like it takes a minute or two to get the audio up. David Ballot was not able to be here today, but he did text me and said that his August 15 and 16, they are going to be having, again, the Free to Care conference. This is the political action committee that works strongly with the state government to get our needs handled at the legislative level. I know that I'm speaking, and I think there's a great lineup of speakers there. He is offering 50%, I think it's a discount, 30% discount. So if anybody is interested in attending that, please, I'll post it on LinkedIn, but anybody wants that direct information, please let me know. And here we go. Here we got Wichita Falls.
Thank you, Dr. Dickerson. So we invited today to this meeting a few courageous employers that have adopted a high-performing healthcare plan. We have 2 direct primary care doctors here locally with us, municipalities represented, industries represented, some other large employers. And so we're just trying to introduce more about these type of plans to the community to try to get to that 3% that Dave mentioned in his presentation. We think that if we can get to this 3%, having courageous employers adopt these plans, because Wichita Falls, let's face it, is not an early adopter community. It needs to be proven somewhere else first before we can scale it to the rural community where we live here. And we're on the track to do that. And more exposure to this sort of information, I believe, will get us to the point where we can arm wrestle this healthcare system that is such monopoly here in Wichita Falls that we can eventually get to the point where we can have direct contracts in place and lower the cost to the employers putting these dollars back to work in this community. So we're just trying to get to that 3%. We have a hospital system that's really playing hardball on not wanting to do direct contracting. They like that compensation they receive from these big insurance companies with the PPO networks, and they're just hesitant to try to reduce what they would get when they deliver services to the patients. So hopefully we'll get there soon. I'm looking forward to being with you guys in Denver next week and learning more about and getting Dave's new book. I'm really interested in that, bringing that back to Wichita Falls and using that as a resource with employers we work with. So thank you guys for having this meeting today. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for being here, Kelly, and everything you do at SIA as well. Okay, well, I just wanted to close today with a thought, and that is that, one of the things that I learned last Friday, and I think Dr. Roger did too, at length, we heard about all the problems there are with Texas Medicaid. There are literally millions of people who've been covered by Medicaid who are going to roll off when the emergency healthcare situation is lifted, who aren't going to have healthcare. There are others. They're not able to hire personal attendants for all these disabled people who are on Medicare because they're only paying $8.81 an hour. And, people can get a job at McDonald's for $15 an hour. They're not going to take these jobs, and they're not taking these jobs. So these Medicaid members are ending up in nursing homes. There's a huge long list for people waiting to get on programs with Medicaid. And so a lot of what we heard on Friday was about these problems. Those problems can be solved if they get the people who are on government-controlled health plans like ERS, 400,000 lives on Blue Cross Blue Shield, without really any, cost containment solutions in place. They love what green imaging is doing, but they want us to go through Blue Cross Blue Shield. Yeah, right. So we don't work that way. So, I think if we can really get this committee to start listening to us, we start bolting on some solutions, we can probably change healthcare for all Texans, across the board. And so, that's kind of my dream, for us pulling our energies together, once or twice a year. And so I think this has been very helpful. It's been great seeing everybody. We can go back to those tables and networking, maybe spread out a little bit more this time so that everybody gets a chance to meet everybody. But I look forward to seeing those of you who will be in Denver in person. Those of you who won't, try to stream part of it, because I think the content is amazing, and the energy you'll get from all these people coming together at a national level and really learning from each other, learning best practices, getting ideas, learning the solutions, learning how to work together better, building relationships with those solutions. I mean, I just had a situation today where, we had a member of a health plan using abusive language against my staff, then to all medical management, and we had to come together and solve this problem today. And because I know Nurse Deb, and we, have met at so many conferences, it took us, a couple of emails, we had it handled, we had a solution in place. And so I do think, one thing that the hospitals do provide integrated care, and I think the solutions that are out there, I think we have to learn how to work together well as well. And so, I'm going to kind of leave it there and say thanks, everybody. Again, thanks to Andrea and Shankar for, offering this platform. I think we'll be better at using it next time. We'll have all those names lined up so he can pull people up to the stage more easily. That was my bad. And we'll get this, going better for next time. But really excited to have you all together today, and let's go network.
Yeah, thank you for emceeing this. I'm usually used to being alone with that. Thank you very much, Dr. Dickerson. As you already mentioned, as I end this main session, the networking tables are available to you, and you can continue helping, getting to know, and networking. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the tables.